27th of January. Welcome back to Number of the Day. It's a big one, 86. And in this case, it's 86 years, Francis Herd, and we're saying goodbye. We're deconstructing a massive construction firm in Barloworld. They're out.
Barloworld, this iconic South African company, has been listed, yes, for 86 years. It was sold, and this was a done deal last year, but today is the moment when it's no longer on the JSE board. And in fact, it even goes back to 1902 it began. So if people listening don't know Barloworld, it used to be a big conglomerate involved in mining. It still is the dealer for Caterpillar construction equipment across Southern Africa, but it was involved in everything. It was this huge conglomerate. It unbundled, but it's still involved in construction equipment and other things. And yeah, it's off the JSE because it's been bought.
This has been bought. We'll get into who's bought it in a moment, because if I had to think back about what Barloworld did in the world of sport, it wasn't just the mining. I mean, that was their main thing, mining and construction and Caterpillar and all those good things. But when they were really pushing into the South African market, I'm going back to maybe late 90s, somewhat early 2000s, they were involved. And if any of you are watching are big cycling fans and big sports fans, Barloworld was the headline sponsor for one of, and I would not even say arguably, they were the biggest cycling team in South Africa, in Africa, and arguably at one point, Francis Herd, even over in Europe. There was a professional cycling team with the likes of Bradley Wiggins, Chris Froome, which you cannot claim as South African, by the way. Stop it. He was Kenyan, but he raced in South Africa. And even Robbie Hunter, who won a stage of the Tour de France. You can find that iconic red Barloworld jersey with the yellow Caterpillar, the cat yellow sign on their jersey as well.
Are
and
these people you know?
I do know them.
Because let's just add in here that you used to cycle.
Yes, so there was many, many years ago. You wouldn't think it now, but I was a much skinnier version of me back in the day, and I was involved in professional cycling at that level from a management perspective. And Barloworld, what they did is they came in and just professionalized cycling in South Africa. Yes, you had other big names. You had Konica Minolta, AIG, HSBC, etc. Yeah. But when Barloworld came in, they took African cycling into Europe. And I think that's been the springboard for so many South African cyclists and the sport in general. So even though Barloworld delisting, back in the day as a sponsorship, I think it's changed cycling in South Africa and in Europe significantly.
So this is so interesting because today, a big new sponsorship deal has been announced. So talk about that quickly, because sponsorships are important. Yeah, and I think a lot of people know Barloworld because of cycling.
Correct, they do. And so you can imagine the sort of impact that Barloworld had. It was a multi-year deal. Barloworld as a cycling team eventually was bought out by another massive European, UK-based broadcaster. But it does come back to these interest in sports sponsorship. Today, you're talking about what was happening out in Orlando. I mean, Amstel coming in there, now sponsoring Orlando Pirates. The Buccaneers is now the Orlando Amstel Arena. And I've always found that interesting. Why would a massive organization get involved in sports sponsorship? It's basically a moving billboard. But beyond it being a moving billboard, the selling of the merchandise, it shows for me in South African soccer anyway, if we stick with Amstel for the moment, is they see the success of local football. They see the success of African football, and they know their market. They know their audience. And even after all these years, one of the oldest clubs in South Africa, Orlando Pirates, they can still pull such a big sponsorship. And obviously Amstel, they know they can get the money. They know they can get the eyes. They had Heineken back in the day, the UEFA Champions League, and still they're throwing money at local football.
Which is great, although South Africans are also big drinkers. This is part of it.
I'm glad you said it, because I didn't want to say it, because previous sponsors of Orlando Pirates, obviously being Black Label, Amstel wants them to, pop the lid on some cold Amstels while watching the Buccaneers hopefully beat Sundowns in years to come.
All right, so getting back to Barloworld, they've been bought by a consortium of companies led by a Saudi Arabian company.
Why doesn't that surprise me
Zahid
these
Group.
days?
Well, I find it fascinating because we often hear of South Africans wanting to work in Saudi Arabia. It's
It's good money.
Doing things. It's good money, and things are happening there. Obviously, oil is happening, and that leads to a lot of other things. But this is interesting that a Saudi Arabian company is interested in South Africa. So I spoke to the strategic lead on the transaction last night on air, and he said this is a good sign for investment in South Africa. Apparently, these two companies had a synergy and a connection because they both were selling Caterpillar equipment in different parts of the world. There was some controversy because the Barloworld CEO is leading a company that is part of this consortium, Newco. And people were saying there's a conflict of interest. Not all shareholders were on board. So he said in response to that, we have rules. Everybody was happy with this. I think the PIC last year was happy with this. So it went through, and he said it's good. And actually, in that part of the world, this is creating interest, and there is some interest in South African companies and in investing here, which is the good news.
Which is the good news. I wonder, though, with a delisting after decades now for Barloworld, from a listing and a delisting perspective, for the JSE, is it good when a company delists? I mean, I can't imagine it is. I mean, they obviously want people to list, but what does it mean for the JSE when a massive company like Barloworld delists? Does it affect the JSE in some way, or is it just investors?
It does. And let's look at the reason why companies land up on the JSE board. They want to raise money. So then they can go to all the shareholders in the market and say, buy our shares, we can raise the money and do wonderful things with that, and we'll share the profits with you. So generally, it's good for companies to be there, but some of them have found it hard. There's a lot of regulation, a lot of red tape because you are a publicly listed company. And sometimes they're just deals like this, right? Sometimes the managers say, well, on the board, we're not listed high enough. We're not getting the price. So we'll unlock value if we delist and we rather go private. So the JSE has actually been concerned because there's been a bit of an exodus. I was looking at the numbers. Over 20 years, 1994 and 2024, the number of companies halved.
Wow.
In 2001, there was this great spike, more than 600 companies on the JSE, but now we're below 300 companies. So you can see that there have been delistings over time, and the JSE is trying to counter that, saying we will get the listings. And of course, there have been some listings, and it does seem to be picking up maybe last year because there were a lot of delistings in 2023 and 2024. Last year, we had Cell C coming on. That was quite an exciting one. And there are some companies listing. Now, beyond what the JSE makes, right, because the JSE makes money from companies being listed, it's also good for us as investors in the stock market, if we are, to have lots of choice. So you do want choice. So some of these things are just because there's a deal or a buyout, but generally we want as much choice as possible for South African investors. So the JSE is worried, but it is saying, yes, we're going to rebuild that pipeline of companies going to list.
So just before we wrap up on Barloworld for today's number of the day, so if a new company, let's say Gareth Inc., wants to come and get listed with an IPO on the JSE, do I have to wait for Barloworld to leave before I can come in, or can the JSE still let me in regardless? Is this replacing like for like?
No. The JSE can have as many companies on its board as it wants, as I understand, and the more the better, right? Because it gives that choice. So no, it's not about that, but there are hurdles. When Cell C listed last year, it had taken a long time. So there are requirements you have to meet, and I'm not an expert on that. But let me give you some examples. So last year, Volterra Platinum, that was listed, but it actually came from Anglo-Plat. Anglo-American spun off Anglo-Plat. So we had this new company. Cell C, Optasia, those were good tech listings. And it's more exciting for the JSE if its primary listing is on the JSE. A lot of the global companies have primary listings overseas. For example, Anglo. listed in London, but you have a secondary listing on the JSE, which is good for South Africans because they can then buy a piece of Anglo. There were 6 listings in total. The others were secondary listings. But let me just give you a few more examples. MultiChoice has left. So Canal Plus bought MultiChoice. So hopefully Canal Plus will have a secondary listing on the JSE, and then you can still invest if you believe in DSTV and whatever MultiChoice now Canal Plus is doing. Adcock Ingram left. So yeah, there's a bit of churn, but for the JSE, they want more churn in than out. So let's wrap it up there. Leaving the JSE after 86 years, an iconic South African company, Barloworld.